Well, we're like 6 hours removed from the game, mate. Not much sleep last night. Straight in the studio today. What were your overall thoughts on the game?
Overall thoughts were, at the end of the day, the Lions have won the opening test match in a test series against Australia. So I suppose you can't complain too much of that. And let's start really positive. The opening 20 minutes was really impressive from the Lions in terms of they took the game away from the Wallabies. And I know it was only, what was it, 10-0 or 30, whatever it was. But it was just that sense of dominance, wasn't it, in terms of the physicality. I thought Tom Curry and Tyburn, who were probably under the most pressure this week in terms of selection calls, were just incredible. I saw Tyburn, Andy Farrell said in the press conference, he tends to have big games in big games, which was the case last night, wasn't it? He justified his selection, and Tom Curry was just everywhere. And that's why we spoke about it beforehand, about the balance of the back row. And I think that's what the balance of the back row gives you. Conan was just industrious, wasn't he, in terms of hard yards, got through his work as he always does. Curry just seemed to be absolutely everywhere, and Tyburn produced big moments in important parts of the game as well. So I think a really good start, and obviously the halfbacks were something we highlighted before the game. But I always felt like that was going to be the biggest gulf in class between the two, and I think it showed. And that's not a reflection, or I'm almost not judging Tom Liner because he's a 22-year-old guy in his first test match against that back row, against that halfback partnership, against that team, and they were professional, efficient, disciplined in that first 20 minutes, and they were excellent. And I think everyone can wake up from Britain and Ireland today very, very happy.
How does that test performance compare to the warm-up games then?
I think it was a fairly similar feel, wasn't it? In terms of like what I've found in this tour in particular has been that the Lions have almost played in almost like 10-minute blocks or 20-minute blocks where they've been really good, really efficient, really dynamic. And then they've sort of coughed up maybe 5 or 10 minutes of ill discipline or some sort of a couple of handling errors and things like that. And I think that's been the general theme throughout the tour. But what they have got, they've got so much quality in their playing group. They've got so much quality in their coaching group that when they get in those sort of 5-10 minute periods, they've got enough experience, enough quality to get them out of it. I just feel like it's been, okay, brilliant for 5 minutes, brilliant for 10 minutes, really below par in other periods. And I think that's kind of how the game went a little bit, didn't it? They almost invited Australia back into the game in that second half by ill discipline, by a few handling errors, by a few mistakes. I suppose they set the tone now in terms of like that opening 20 minutes. I think if you can't be as good as that for the whole game, of course, but I think where they drop off to probably needs to be a little bit higher than where they do drop off to.
Do you think Joe Schmidt's seen some weaknesses there in that 20-minute period that he's going to try and explore next week?
I think there's a bit of a blueprint there. Because what the Lions have been so good at all tour, whether it's against the Brumbies, the Reds, the Wallabies on Saturday, their line speed has just been, it's spooking teams. And especially a young 10 who perhaps isn't used to that type of heat in his face all afternoon. What they're doing is and when teams play against that line speed, you almost think, okay, well, you think you can beat it on the outside, or you think you can get round it. But because the pressure is so quick and so intense, you just feed in the line speed. And if you play 2 or 3 passes and you don't shorten the defense up, you're in a bit of trouble. Whereas that last 20 minutes, I thought Tate McDermott added something when he came on. I thought he brought a real bit of zip to the breakdown. I thought he challenged them in that way, and I thought he brought his forwards into the game a bit more in that sort of pick and go, one out rugby. And when you play that type of style, you don't feed the line speed. You don't give the Lions a chance to put pressure on 10, 12, 13. You then have to win physical battles, which Australia did for that sort of 20-minute period. And I think that'll be a little bit more of a blueprint for Joe Schmidt rather than trying to play against that line speed, because the Lions' defense has been good, hasn't it? Was good again yesterday. You know what I mean? Even when they were under, because I think at one point in that second half, they were at 76% possession, Australia. So you don't get away with that if your defense isn't good and you're not committed and you're not structured in what you're doing. But I do think that Joe Schmidt will have looked at that last 20 minutes and thought, is this the way to maybe approach the game, especially given that they may well have Valentini, Skelton, Tupou, that's up for debate. But if you've got a little bit more power, Angus Bell may well start. So it's like you've got a load more firepower if those guys are available. Do you then maybe play to your strengths in that scenario?
We highlighted the Lions halfbacks as being a real point of difference for the Lions compared to the sort of relatively inexperienced Wallabies halfbacks. Comparing the two, what was the difference there? Why did the Lions 9 and 10 excel, whereas maybe the Wallabies faltered a little bit?
Yeah, I think if you compare them like for like, I always find it really difficult because when you play 9 and 10, it's very much dictated to, if you're on the front foot and your forwards are providing a great platform, you're always going to be judged more favourably and you're always going to have a little bit of an easier time than a 9 and 10 who are on the back foot and fighting and scrambling a little bit. But I have to say, I thought we said that we sort of compared the two, didn't we, in terms of the halfbacks, and Gibson Park and Russell just looked real international world class. And the other two in Liner, who's a young kid making his first start, so it's really difficult to actually compare like for like. And Gordon, but I didn't think Gordon probably helped Liner a huge amount. I thought his kicking probably wasn't as accurate. Gibson Park was just incredible in terms of every single kick on the money, gave his wingers a chance to compete for the ball, moved the Lions up the pitch, took a load of pressure off Finn Russell. And I think if you're going to ask for a perfect sort of 10, 15 minute starts to a test match, you'd go far. You'd be well pushed to find it better than Finn Russell's on Saturday night. Obviously the penalty goal to settle him was a nice start for him. Then the 50-22, which he admitted on camera, which he's absolutely spattered into the corner. And then the flick for Jack Cohen and the pass for Tuipulotu. His overall, I suppose his overall confidence, not that he probably needed a huge confidence boost, but though that opening 10, 15 minutes from Finn Russell was as good as you'll see in a test match. So, yes, the Lions were dominant. Yes, they started the game a lot better than Australia. But yeah, I suppose when you just comparing the two, I think that's where the biggest difference was on the pitch last night. I just felt like that it looked fairly obvious, didn't it, that Gibson Park and Russell are experienced world-class players, and the other two are probably just, a little bit below that.
Are you happy with the balance of the back row? Because I think that was the main talking point before the game, the Jack Morgan omission and stuff like that. But Tom Curry,
put a Welsh accent on there for Jack
thanks,
Morgan
mate.
as well.
I've been practicing that, yeah. But Tom Curry looked pissed off, didn't he? And even his comments, post-match, he looked pissed off and he played like that, but he was world class.
I think you saw from his try celebration just how fired up he was, how much it meant, how much he... And sometimes when you're under pressure, you perform at your best. And players like Tom, who've been there, done it, know what it takes to perform at the highest level. Actually, I don't mind that from Tom, in terms of he was clearly cheesed off. But I'm not sure he's cheesed off because you're going to take it personally because it's yourself, and it's easy to say to somebody else, "Oh, don't take it personally," or "Don't worry about it." But it's not you; that's under the microscope. But if we're comparing, say, the sevens, let's just take the sevens for argument's sake on tour. You'd probably say that Earl, Morgan, potentially Van der Fleer and Pollock may well, on tour form, be ahead of him. Now, where Andy Farrell was really smart and almost like a bit of a stroke of genius was that he thought, no, I know that this guy has been there, done it, can deliver, almost used that to his advantage, that he's going to be, Tom Curry fired up is a pretty dangerous animal, isn't he? You know what I mean? He's everywhere on the pitch, challenging for everything, counter-rucking everything. So I just think that worked to his advantage. And the other big selection call where he went with players who he knew could deliver big performances in big games. So Tom Curry was one which has been ticked off and massively a success. And the other was Tyke Byrne, who, just big moments. Curry was everywhere, and you saw him throughout the whole pitch, from minute one to to when he went off. But I thought Tyburn produced like big moments, big turnovers. As you watch him for Ireland, that was Tyburn for Ireland. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That wasn't Tyburn that's been potentially on, or who's been on tour for the last couple of weeks. And he said as much in his own interview afterwards. He said he probably felt a bit lucky and a bit grateful to Andy Farrell for giving him the shirt, and he felt like he owed him a performance. But that for me, that's Tyburn that you see every Six Nations game. Jackals, choke tackles, work rate, line out, just everything you'd expect from Tyburn in a Lions shirt, where we probably haven't quite seen that from him. So the two of them just was so good. And then you look at who was in the middle of it, and we've said this for a while, haven't we, in terms of Jack Conan. He won't get the same praise as what Tyburn and Tom Curry get. But I thought he was he's just an out and out 8. And that's so rare in the game. You don't have, like, you look at lots of back rows at the minute, it's like, oh, he's 8, but he can play 6, or he do, like a Ben Earl, for argument's sake. But he's just an out and out 8 who's going to give you grunt, make his tackles, work hard, get his hard carries in. I actually thought he looked good in a little bit more open space as well yesterday. He looked like he was had a bit more room to maneuver in. So yeah, balance of the back row really good. And you have to say hats off to Andy Farrell, because probably everybody thought it was going to be Chesham. Everybody thought it was going to be Jack Morgan, or one of another. Maybe not Tom Curry, but he went with his gut, went with players who he knew he could trust, and it paid off quite well.
A word on the Wallabies then, because, they had that late comeback, 20 minutes to go. But to me, they looked a little bit undercooked. And is that a representation of maybe the poor prep they've had? They played Fiji, but they had that one warm-up game. They hadn't played since the autumn, and then there was the controversy around not releasing Wallabies players back to the clubs to play the warm-up games. So do you think that's coming back to bite them now?
I think the scoreline probably flattered the Wallabies a little bit, didn't it? The Lions, I felt, were considerably better than 8 points, than to an 8-point victory. But again, we go back to that opening 20 minutes. And sometimes when you play Test rugby, or you haven't played a huge amount of Test rugby, whether you're a guy like James Slipper who's played 140 odd games, or a guy like Tom Liner starting your first game, that intensity and the pace of the game, the physicality of a test of that magnitude sometimes catches you out if you're not absolutely, it would be very different maybe if this tour, for argument's sake, was at the end of the Rugby Championship, where they've been battle-hardened against the Springboks, Argentina and New Zealand. But it looked to me as if that they almost grew into the game, and it's like they almost found the intensity, the physicality, the level they needed to be at, but probably a little bit late on in the game, and the scoreboard was probably too much in the Lions' favour. So again, looking forward to Melbourne, and if you compare where they probably will be, where they were starting the game in Brisbane, compare that to where they'll probably start the game in Melbourne, there'll probably be a stark difference in the physicality and the pace of the game. But you've also got the risk of bringing Skelton, Valentini, Tupou back in, is that those guys wouldn't have experienced that. And Ronan O'Gara made a really good point about Will Skelton yesterday. He said he's not the guy who's generally just going to come in and hit a 9 out of 10 performance. He kind of needs to build up a little bit as well. So that was interesting to hear Rog say that. But I do think that when you play Test rugby and you haven't played for a while, it's a little bit like you see a lot of teams in the autumn internationals where the New Zealanders, South Africans, Australians generally have been playing together for so long, used to Test match intensity. They come to that first game of the autumn and it's normally quite a shock for Wales, Ireland, England, Scotland. Whereas I think this time it was a bit of a roles reverse. It looked as if the Lions had played lots of matches together. That game, I think I have to say, I know everyone was disappointed against that for that Argentina game. But I almost think that was the best thing that happened to the Lions in terms of playing a team with that quality, that intensity, and almost slipping up was probably a good thing to focus back again. So, but yeah, I have to say that the 8 point, it didn't feel like an 8 point match, did it?
No.
So I do think that was. It'll flatter the Wallabies, but they'll have found a blueprint, and they'll be a lot more up to speed of the intensity and the pace of this Test series come the MCG.
So our Go.Compare Key Decision this week then, who's retained from Test 1 to Test 2? Are you expecting wholesale changes, or do you think Andy Farrell goes same again?
I think the starting team will be. I'd be surprised. I mean, McCarthy coming off injured after 43. I didn't look overly serious, but sometimes in a week, sometimes that can be the difference between playing at maybe 90% compared to maybe 75%. So that's the one. If you compare, let's compare what ran out on Saturday evening to what we think or what potentially could run out at the MCG. I'd say that is one that maybe the front row were all brilliant, so they start again. Second row, Marrow's clearly going to start as captain. That's the one. Is how bad is that injury to McCarthy? If it's something that they don't want to take a risk on, or he's not 100%, you may well look to somebody like Chesham to come into that role. I think he was good coming off the bench in terms of added some physicality, and then you'd expect, I'd be absolutely amazed if that back row doesn't start again in terms of the quality that they produced last night. So I think forwards wise, I think that's the only change I can see in partnering Marrow, depending on the injury. Halfbacks, again, Finn Russell made a quip saying, we're not quite sure who's playing, but I'd imagine he'd probably get a game this weekend. Finn Russell, I'd be incredibly surprised if he wasn't starting. 9 and 10. The centres is quite interesting because I thought Sione Tuipulotu in that first 20 minutes, Hugh Jones looked sharp. They both looked sharp, didn't they?
Yeah.
I thought they looked like they were up to speed. They looked comfortable playing with Finn Russell at 10, 12, 13 access. So
if Ringrose is fit, could you see him? Because I think they come as a pair, don't I? think it's established now that it's either the Scotland pair or the Irish pair. If Ringrose passes his concussion protocol, do you think they swap them out?
Well, I think so. You look at Gary Ringrose, and he's probably going to need some minutes against the First Nations and Pacifica 15 on Tuesday evening. So you think he has to play some minutes because of missing the last couple of games. But for me, I think it's you look at a team. Andy Farrell said it's about winning. Everyone it's about winning, and you tend to reward a winning team more often than not. And I think the two of them went well. Their relationship with Finn Russell was really good. It looked in that again. I know we're harping on, but that first 20 minutes set the tone in terms of the pace of the game. They looked like they played together for a while, didn't they? So Gary Ringrose is going to need some minutes. Is it a bit too short a turnaround? And did Sione and Hugh Jones play too well together to force the issue in that? I think it probably is. I think where the interesting position maybe lies is a centre on the bench. Now, obviously yesterday they had Alex Mitchell, Marcus Smith, who covered 10 and 15, and Bundy Aki, who covered centre. Now, where you could see a potential change on the bench is that do you bring Owen? Basically, if you pick Owen Farrell, you're covering 10 and 12 on the bench. So that then allows you to pick a back three player on the bench as opposed to Bundy Aki, because it would be a waste to have Owen Farrell and a centre on the bench. If you pick Marcus Smith, you know that you've got cover at 10 and 15. And it allows you to continue to pick Bundy Aki again. So that, I think, is almost the biggest decision. And it may well depend on Blair Kinghorn and Mac Hansen in terms of their fitness. So if they're both fit, or one of them is fit, I think you'll see Owen Farrell potentially on the bench on Saturday, just because he gives that 10-12 cover and it allows them to put a back three player on the bench. Because if you get, say Keenan gets injured in the first minute, you're then having to either bring, if you pick Marcus Smith, you have to bring Marcus Smith on, you have to shuffle things around. I think he'll want to maybe have a bit more cover in that 10-12 position and pick a back three player on the bench. Talking of the back three, I'm not, was it a vintage performance from the back three last night? The answer is probably no, but I still think, again, like James Lowe in big, it's going to be a bit tighter this week, and Australia are going to up their levels of performance, no doubt. Again, it goes back to that. He knows and can trust James Lowe as well. And was he absolutely the top of the game last night? Probably not. I just think that if the result had gone the other way, it's funny, isn't it, how sometimes results can change selection? Because if the Wallabies had come back into it and nicked it at some point, I think you may have seen a few changes. But because the Lions got themselves into that position, got over the line, I think he'll reward it with the same team, with potentially that partner in whoever's going to partner Marrow, depending on McCarthy's injury. And that place on the bench, I think, is probably up for grabs. And also, does Luke Cowan-Dickie come back in off the, in terms of on the bench as well? Because, I thought that Dan Sheehan was incredible. So that's I suppose, comparing the two teams that are going to run out, there'd be very limited changes, maybe one or two on the bench, with boys coming back in terms of Luke Cowan-Dickie. Maybe Owen Farrell comes in to cover 10-12. And then obviously the lock partner in Marrow. Right,
the headline, Biggs. In your opinion, does Owen Farrell make the bench?
He'll feel more comfortable with Owen Farrell on the bench to slot in at 10 if Finn Russell goes down after 5 minutes. I think Marcus gives that ability to cover 10 and 15. I think they're quite, I think centres wise they're strong in terms of Sione and Hugh. But I think possibly he'll feel more comfortable with Owen Farrell on the bench covering 10 if Finn Russell went down injured. I think it's not easy to say, is it? But I think if you asked him outright and you asked him for an honest answer, who would you want coming on to replace Finn Russell after 5 minutes? The answer would probably be Owen Farrell. And I think probably most people's answer would be Owen Farrell, even though he hasn't been at that level for a while. He'll probably have some minutes, I'd imagine, at 12 on. You'd imagine at 12 because Finn Smith needs to play as well. So you'd imagine he'll have some minutes at 12 on Tuesday night, and then as long as he comes through that and shows a bit of sort of form and fitness, I'd imagine, that's the way I would look at it, is that who would you want coming on after? Because I don't think Finn Russell will play probably 80 minutes if it's tight and he's fit, you know what I mean? But it's just having that safety net, and I can see that from Andy Farrell's point of view.
And the Wallabies, do you think they make many changes? Because I still feel like they don't really know their best 15.
No, they don't. And it's surprising. We were chatting this after the game, and we're saying, like, you look how slick they looked in the autumn series against England, against Wales, even pushing Ireland right to the limit, wasn't it, in terms of in Dublin? And they just didn't quite get back to that. And yes, Loaseo was missing, and I'm not saying Loaseo is absolutely like top end in terms of your Russells, your Moangas and Pollards and guys like that. But he obviously is an important part of that team, isn't he? And he plays in that team consistently. So do they change Liner? I think it would be harsh on him. It would really be harsh given that the platform he had and things. I think the Wallabies start Tate McDermott. I thought he added some zip when he came on. I thought he added some spark. And just picked the pace of the game. It's always easier doing that off the bench. I think it's important to say you've watched the game for 60 minutes. You know where the weaknesses are. The drop off from the Lions was considerable, and he added a bit of spark. But I think he'll start. I'd like to see Liner go again because I think he deserves it off the back of a pretty tough challenge for him in terms of getting out there in that first 20 minutes, and then it's all about injuries. And I thought Wilson actually was brilliant at 8. He was one of the shining lights for the Wallabies. But if Valentini is fit, if Skelton is fit, if I don't know what the story is with Tupou, but I feel like what they lacked in on Saturday night was power, and the 3 names we just talked about have got that in abundance. Even if you just give Tupou 40 minutes, just tell him to empty the tank, and we've got a guy who's got a fair few caps coming on, or whatever you want to go, however you want to go. And then I think Angus Bell starts. I think that's where they've not missed a trick because players have been injured, but I think the difference that team looks on paper, and as well, that's one thing I will say. I looked at the two teams. I compared the two teams on paper. I looked at the Wallabies team when it was named compared to the Lions team, and I thought to myself, how does that Wallaby team beat the Lions team? And I couldn't find an answer. You stick Tupou, Bell, Skelton, Valentini, potentially, look at McDermott to come in, and I think, okay, there's a way in which they can win. You look at the two teams, compare the two teams, you think there is a way they can win. But for Saturday night in Brisbane, when I saw the two teams, I just thought, how do they win? Thanks to Go.Compare for sponsoring today's video. Drop us a like, drop us a comment, and we'll be back next week for another video.